I want you to have control over your own body, and I want you to be able to live your life as your authentic self in peace.
Chase Oliver is the Libertarian Party candidate.
Voters deserve a chance to have their voices heard, and they shouldn't have to be lumped into one box or the other. We have to put the ideas out there.
I recently posted a short video with Oliver, but he has many other interesting ideas. So here's our full interview. We discuss the controversies over immigration, war, taxes, welfare, and what it means to be a libertarian. What's a libertarian?
A libertarian is someone that allows you to live your life in peace, free from government intrusion. We seek to fight for the idea that if you're not harming anyone, your life is your life, your body's your body, your business is your business, and your property is your property. Not the government's and not mine, because we believe in the most local governance, which is self-governance.
But don't Democrats and Republicans basically believe that?
Well, they love to talk the talk about that stuff, about freedom and liberty.
A belief in liberty.
We followed freedom.
It's about freedom.
But in reality, they could put all kinds of government programs that invade your privacy, your business, your life. And we think if you're living your life in peace, why do we have those expenditures? Why are we taking tax money out of somebody's pocket to fund a program through government that honestly, just about every program could be better done through the private marketplace?
You say government is ultimately violence. What do you mean?
No matter what government is, it has a monopoly on violence. And no matter what the law is, the regulation.
By violence, you mean force?
Yeah, force. Force at the end of the day is what government uses to push its goals upon other people. Everything is backed by a bullet and a badge. And so for me, I think of what's important, okay? Murder is important. We need a bullet and a badge there to prevent murder. Do we need a bullet and a badge to prevent licensure for so many jobs that we have in this world? We pay over $100 a month to be a fortune teller in the state of Georgia. Do we really need that? Does that need to be backed with a bullet and a badge? Or can we just trust that, people can go to the people they want to go to for their haircuts or for their fortune telling or anything else that's currently licensed? That doesn't need to be backed with force.
So you're elected. Let's pretend. The economy. First thing, what would you do?
Well, the first thing I would do is signify to Congress that if they submit to me a budget that isn't balanced, it'll be a vetoed budget. I'll be challenging Congress to get to a neutral budget so we're not adding to the debt and deficit.
All right, they'll say, sure, we'll balance it. We'll raise taxes.
It is time for a wealth tax.
Yeah, you're going to have to pay more in taxes.
We're pushing for fair taxation on the billionaires.
Well, that won't be happening under me either. That'll also be a vetoed budget. The cutting of spending is what's important. We're not going to tax our way out of this problem. We could tax everybody to 100%. All the millionaires and billionaires that are quote unquote not paying their fair share, that would fund the government for a few weeks, if anything. The problem is spending, not taxing. We need to cut taxes, but we have to cut spending first.
Shouldn't the rich pay more? We have more.
What we need to start seeing is actually removing taxation as much as possible across all levels. Because when we take money out of anybody's pocket, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, we're removing their ability to make more economic decisions and create new wealth, create new opportunities. And so, no, I think it doesn't matter what income level you're at, you as an individual, rich or poor, can probably better allocate your resources and figure out a better way to spend your money than a government bureaucrat who has no idea who you are.
Biden administration is rolling out heavy tariffs.
New tariffs.
Aluminum tariffs.
You would end tariffs.
Yes. I believe it's economic protectionism. Tariffs are paid by the consumer. They're not paid for by China. When we put a tariff on China, Chinese businesses aren't paying that tariff. We are when we buy goods that come from outside the United States. And that adds the cost that every American family is facing right now. And it's a trade war that we don't need to be engaged in. We need to be encouraging free and open trade. And those who engage in economic protectionism, their economies will suffer in the long run. So we need to encourage free trade, open trade, and voluntary exchange, as opposed to trying to tariff our way out of a trade war with China.
And yet Trump passed big tariffs on China. Biden increased them, or plans to. And they say it's because we have to protect American business.
Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs move overseas.
And that's just ridiculous. What that is Joe Biden doubling and tripling down on the policies that he ran against in 2020. So he's running against his own policies that he said he supported in 2020 by doubling and tripling down on Trump's tariffs. What that is that's Joe Biden being afraid and trying to use fear of China to keep him in office, when really he should be championing free trade. That's the truth. But he's not doing that, and he's a failure because of that. He's failing American businesses.
What about those businesses that are getting undercut by cheap stuff coming in from overseas?
Cheap Chinese products. The U.S. fears that overproduction of certain goods
by China will hurt American businesses and workers.
Yeah, but what about the businesses that take those goods overseas and turn them into something, a product or a service here in the United States? And now that cost of doing business has raised due to these tariffs, and that costs American jobs. If you have to say, hey, my bottom line has increased due to tariffs, I can't hire another worker, that's hurting the American economy. That's hurting the American family.
You should nominate me or at least vote for me.
Donald Trump spoke at the recent Libertarian Party convention. RFK Jr. spoke too.
I don't recall any part of the United States Constitution where there's an exemption for pandemics.
But Oliver won the nomination.
Thank you, Libertarian Party.
You're an unusual candidate. You never went to college. You went right to work.
College for me was something that I just was not comfortable in. I don't really like the classroom setting. I got ADD, and I always want to get out and do things and not really sit in a classroom so much. So for me, getting right into the workforce was important for me, and it taught me skills that I've been basically gaining skills from that first day on the workforce to today that have been more valuable to me than a lot of time in the classroom, honestly.
And workforce meant restaurants.
Well, I started out in restaurants. Yeah, my first job was being a dishwasher, but then I basically did every job you could do in a restaurant, got my expertise in the field, and was actually helping to advise new entrepreneurs how to open restaurants. And then from there, I moved into the world of logistics, where I got an appreciation for free markets, moving goods from one side of the world to the other.
You're barely old enough to legally run for president.
Yeah.
Why you?
I think there was a need for younger people and younger generations to actually start rising up and having a voice in our politics. The same people who are pulling the levers of Congress and levers of power today are the same people who were pulling them 20 years ago when I was in high school. I feel like a whole generation has been left out of having a voice, having leadership, and being able to rise up and have their concerns heard. And I think that's much to do with the incumbency factor that we have in our Congress. And it's something that I hope to change.
They are the oldest people ever to run for president, breaking by only 4 years the record that they set.
I hope to wake new voters up, younger voters up, non-voters up to the fact that there's options out of there other than octogenarians who have been in power for 30, 40, 50 years in Joe Biden's case.
In every state, if crazy ballot rules let you, you'll be on the ballot against Biden and Trump. What's wrong with those two alternatives?
Joe Biden is a creature of Washington, D.C. He's part of the last 50 years of all the government problems that we've seen. He hasn't found a problem that hasn't had a government solution. And frankly, many of the ideas that he's put forward during his time in the Senate, as vice president, as president, are basically really bad ideas.
It's always more government, more rules.
Pretty much with him. He finds that government is the best vehicle to try to push the social changes that he wants to push, tries to push the economic policies that he wants to push. And I'm the exact opposite. I'm a libertarian. I think I can trust you and all the other people out there to make better decisions than 435 central planners in Washington, D.C. I trust millions and millions of people to make trillions and trillions of marketplace decisions. And so he's just this old status quo creature of Washington that is just everything we haven't liked about Washington for the last 50 years. And then you have Donald Trump, who is an agent of chaos, a blatant authoritarian, someone who has openly professed that he's going to use the mechanisms of government to punish his enemies. He's running to be vengeful, not running for the American people. And many of the things he criticizes Joe Biden on, he's done himself. He's blown up the debts and the deficit. He's been terrible in the economy. And so for me, it's just two awful choices.
Not that terrible. The economy grew. Unemployment's low.
Yes, but people are feeling stress from inflation. So, sure, unemployment might be low, but our dollar is worth less and less as we print trillions of dollars a year out of thin air. That's a hidden tax that doesn't require any legislation, doesn't require any congressperson to vote for it or against it. They just know that if they debt and deficit spend, the Treasury will print, and that inflation will be felt by each and every American's wallet. It doesn't matter where your dollar is. It can be in a business, a bank account, or in your pocket right now. Inflation eats away at that. It eats away at the savings of every American, and that's an immoral tax that we have to, address.
We are going to drain the swamp.
Donald Trump said he would drain the swamp. He didn't.
Yeah, he definitely didn't.
How would you do it?
I would like to drain the swamp by actually, removing the size and the scope of the federal workforce, by finding programs and departments that are inefficient and redundant, which, just throw a stone at Washington, D.C., and you'll find a program that's redundant or inefficient. So I would actually reduce the overall size of the federal workforce, just like Milei did in Argentina.
Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad, afuera.
He said afuera to so many government departments.
Argentina's annual inflation reached more than 100%.
I hope the American people can look at what happened in Argentina and say, maybe we don't need to have 60 years of horrible socialistic policies that completely destroy our government before we give the libertarians a chance. Can we do that before we have 150% inflation? Like, we're already suffering right now. How bad do we have to suffer before we say, this two-party system has to go and we have to go somewhere else? I'm hoping it's not that level of desperation, because that's not a world I would want to live in. But the Libertarian Party will be here ready to pick up the mantle, ready to take the charge whenever the American public gets sick and tired of Democrats and Republicans enough.
You support what Milei is doing in Argentina?
Putting a libertarian economist in charge of an economy is not the worst thing to do. And lucky for me, I have a running mate who is one. So we're going to be in really great shape if we win the White House this November.
You're a Christian, and you describe yourself as armed and gay. You're not armed now in New York, where we are.
I would be if I could. I am somebody who has a great appreciation for the Second Amendment and for our right to defend ourselves. And, I say all the time that armed gays are harder to bash and oppress. That's a line I kind of borrowed from the Pink Pistols, or LGBT gun rights group. But I sincerely believe that as a gay man, I can better protect myself from being bashed if I'm armed.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You say Star Trek gave you hope for the future?
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Trekkie.
But the Enterprise, the ship, with today's regulations, didn't even have seatbelts. It wouldn't be allowed to fly.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, if it was government creating the Enterprise, there'd be lots of redundant and unnecessary things going on. And so I'm kind of glad that, again, it speaks to maybe a more libertarian future where we can build our spaceships without the need for government regulation.
I interviewed Captain Kirk, William Shatner.
We're at the point where the Enterprise wouldn't get off the ground.
Of course it would. I would be there.
Shatner mocked me for calling for less government.
And that's a wonderful principle to have. Government stay out of our lives. And yet, how do you have too many safety rules? You don't know that wall isn't going to fall in. And if it fell in, and then you said, why didn't you make a rule?
I hate to disagree with Captain Kirk, with William Shatner, but there's mechanisms in the marketplace that are way better than government to determine safety, efficacy, and we don't need all those rules, because I have a self-interest in making sure that wall doesn't fall over. I'm sure you do too. And so when we hire someone to build that wall, we want to make sure they're knowing how to do it.
Do you want to build a wall?
Build that wall. Build that wall.
I don't, actually. I want to keep our country open for free and movement of immigration. I think the crisis we have is a crisis of government, not being able to properly process these people through to get to work, and we need the labor here in this country. So I'm a very much...
You would let anybody in who's not a criminal who wants to come?
Yeah, I think you should come through a port of entry, declare who you are, and if you're not someone who's dangerous, come right through. Let the market determine our labor.
We'd be overwhelmed with people, because the rest of the world is so much poorer.
The ways we can address reducing immigration here in the United States is stop creating so much turmoil outside of the United States via our drug war, our militarism. But really, the United States is actually great. What really makes America great is that anybody from anywhere can come here and become an American. Immigrants built this country.
Oliver says he wants an immigration system like the one America used to have, when immigrants were interviewed and checked for disease at Ellis Island.
4 in 10 people in this country can identify a relative that came through Ellis Island. And those Ellis Island immigrants built the jobs, they built the industries in this country. And we just need to allow immigrants to have that same possibility to do it here. In the 21st century.
Right now, people who even come legally have to wait to get permission to work.
I actually spoke to a restaurant owner in El Paso who talked about how, I would love to hire some of these immigrants, but they don't have any proper documentation. And of course, being right here on the Border Patrol could just come right in the restaurant and start asking for papers. And so he's like, as much as I would like to help these people not have to rely on charity and welfare programs, but give them a real job, we're just not able to do that because of the failures of government. We need to solve that crisis so these people can get to work.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. How can we have completely open borders when America has become a welfare state and people would come here to freeload?
Well, 2 things. We need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can oppose the welfare state while fixing the immigration crisis we have at our southern border, which is adding to the cost of the welfare state. The current crisis that we have makes the welfare state even more expensive. And so if we can solve this problem and not have so many people dependent on welfare at the border who are depending on these services instead of getting to work, that will reduce some of the welfare state. But also, people coming here to work will actually increase the overall net positive to the economy. We'll be growing the pie. And we can reduce the welfare state while we also increase the economic pie, let these people start businesses. As we see the children of immigrants start businesses greater than the children of native-born citizens. And so I want to see people to be able to come here and access the best opportunity they can to make the most out of it that they can. And, I think if we do that and speak against the welfare state, we can do both of those things at the same time. They're not exclusive to one another.
What about people who are helpless?
Well, there is some sort of misnomer that libertarians don't care about other people. Just because I don't want the government to help people doesn't mean that I don't think we need to help people. That's better done at the community level using mutual and direct aid. Take money out of the government coffers, put it back in our pockets, and we can better allocate helping our neighbors and our communities ourselves without government programs.
But some people would be missed. Some people live in poor communities where there isn't enough money to help the truly helpless.
In that case, you're going to see groups of people organizing independently out of those communities to help the communities in need. And of course, if we have a limited government, you have more chances to start a small business, to become an entrepreneur, and to generate wealth in your own community. Many times what we're seeing in communities of poverty is that it's the government actually holding these people down, keeping them dependent on welfare programs, when if we actually lessen the government's impact on our lives and allowed them more of a chance to start their own business.
What do you mean keeping them dependent on welfare?
Well, what we have is we have a welfare state in this country. We have people who are being taxed. Those resources are being allocated to help the less fortunate, but it's being done in a very inefficient way. My grandfather used to tell me the government will tax you $1 and they'll give you a dime. And that's how many Americans feel. They feel the wealth being taken from their pocket and not really helping the people to the best of their ability. And that's just failures of government, red tape, bureaucracy, and basically the waste that we see. And everybody feels it.
I think America's top problem is the welfare state, not just for teaching dependency to young people and poor people, but for giving money to people like me, old people. Social Security and Medicare are unsustainable. Republicans and Democratic politicians don't want to talk about it, but you do.
Yeah, they call it the third rail. Well, as the third party candidate, maybe I can touch the third rail and get some people woken up about it. For people like me, people who are around the age of 40, we recognize that even if we contribute to Social Security, it gets taken out of our check every 2 weeks. We're never going to get those benefits because of how unsustainable this system is, how insolvent Social Security is. And so I say, let my generation go from all this. Give us our employee contribution back and let us put that into a mutual fund or an IRA to save. And for those who are at or near retirement, I recognize you've worked your entire life, you've paid in the system, you're going to get those benefits. My parents live on a fixed income. I don't want to remove that from people who are currently on it. But for those who are
you aren't paying in, who's going to pay for them?
So you would leave the employer contribution long enough for it to be solvent, long enough to retire this last generation, and then remove Social Security forever. This needs to be the last generation.
Social Security. You can't win any election criticizing that.
Well, the truth is sometimes you have to be bold in your principles, regardless if it costs you a few votes or not, because we have to put the ideas out there. We have to sound the alarm that Social Security is unsustainable. And frankly, if you were given your wealth back, you could just put that into the marketplace and earn a far better retirement than what the government's providing you in their Ponzi scheme of Social Security.
Far better when you look at the numbers. Might have much more money.
Just put your money in the S&P 500, you'll do better.
Other government programs, the Department of Education.
I would eliminate it. I believe that education should really be, again, at the most local level possible, and that should be to the parents to determine the school their kids want to go to. I don't like seeing the Department of Education saying, hey, if you want $1 of our tax money from the federal government, you got to do $1.10 worth of regulatory action. That ties the hands of local school systems all over the country, and really, we need to be removing ourselves from the government school system altogether and letting parents determine the schools their kids want to go to and letting the educational free market spring up as it needs to. Because I'm from Atlanta. The schools are so bad that the teachers had to cheat on standardized testing to get tax money. And so if that's the system you're raising your children in, you probably want more options.
So that sounds libertarian, but you also say you'd ask Congress to make current student loans interest-free. That doesn't sound libertarian.
Over 90% of student loans are currently backed by the federal government. And so the way we can get these loans off of the government balance sheet as quickly as possible is to remove the interest rate, allow people to pay down the principal, in addition to not adding new government loans to the books. And so this would be a changing of the guard and towards it being a mostly government-backed student loan program back to a more free market program where banks are loaning money on the basis of how valuable that degree is. They'll be much more apt to loan an engineer that money than someone who's in a degree that won't make as much money. This will encourage colleges to actually lower the cost of these programs in accordance with what the marketplace is, as opposed to getting all this government free money. And so, yes, giving them the interest rate free is not the most, I guess, libertarian idea in the world. But getting government out of the business of student loans certainly is a libertarian idea, and this facilitates that as quickly as possible and gets government out of the business of higher education.
That's kind of how it used to be. To get a student loan, you'd go to a bank, and then politicians said, but banks are too cheap and we need to help more people go to college.
The idea that everybody has to go to college is also a misnomer. Like you mentioned before, I didn't graduate from college. I got right in the workforce, and that's what most Americans do. They get up, they go to work, and they pay their bills and they raise their families. And not all of them have to go to a four-year college to do that. I think we've put way too much emphasis on you need to get a four-year degree as opposed to people who maybe need to learn a trade, get an associate's degree. There's all kinds of an educational marketplace out there, and I think government is being solely hyper-focused on four-year college. That's also the reason why colleges and universities are growing so much faster than inflation, because government's involved.
The age of college, safe spaces and microaggressions, students across the U.S. also demanding trigger warnings.
On college campuses, there's been a movement to make the world kinder, to police the cruel insults people have always used. You against that?
Well, I don't think it really prepares those college students for the real world, to be perfectly honest. And no, I don't support speech codes and these kind of safe spaces. I do think that we need to exercise a world in which free speech is valued, open discourse is valued, and you're seeing it both on the left and the right now. You're seeing, of course, college campuses for years were all about safe spaces, and now there's protests on college campuses from the left, and now the right is saying, oh, well, we got to keep students safe. We can't let students protest on college campuses. And, of course, the right, they have always been angry about things like censorship from Facebook and other online platforms. But of course, if they had the power, they would be exercising that same kind of censorship over maybe LGBTQ literature or things like this. I believe in a world of open discourse and open speech. You know, best ideas.
So no matter how hateful and vicious it is?
The reason why we have free speech is to protect that, which is controversial in the speech we don't like. If it was only about protecting the speech everybody liked, we wouldn't have the need for free speech. And so, yeah, you have to allow for controversial, hateful stuff to come out, if for no other reason than identifying who the hateful people are and avoiding them and ostracizing them from society.
States that are urging people to stay home. That covers nearly 95% of the U.S. population.
I would have thought that from what we know now, that the pandemic would have made more people libertarians because people saw, gee, the government made things worse.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we have seen that to a certain degree. One big area of that is in education. So many parents got to see through a Zoom screen how failed the public education system was. And I know so many parents that pulled their kids out of schools. They started individual pod learning or homeschooling or have gone to charter schools because they saw firsthand while they were trying to do their remote work in the other room how badly their children were being educated by a failing public school system that wasn't ready to address the pandemic or the learning challenges that would come from that. And so there's a lot of other examples there. And I think people have become more libertarian. They just need to realize it.
A rise of 3 degrees would affect everyone. Even wealthy cities and rich countries wouldn't be immune to the consequences.
Climate change. What would you do about that?
Well, climate change is something that's not, again, going to be solved by central planners and government. It's going to be solved by human innovation, and that's best facilitated through a free market. Consumers are interested.
Innovation, like maybe someone will invent a carbon suck machine.
Yeah, or be able to create the ability to move goods without the use of carbon. You know, I'm somebody who works in the shipping industry now. Maritime shipping is the cleanest way to move things from A to B. But you know what would be emission free is if we had nuclear powered shipping, right? We can do that. We have nuclear powered submarines. But there's a lot of other technology that can be pushed forward because consumers want it. They want cleaner and more efficient ways to run their lives, to get goods to their store shelves. And so we have to encourage that instead of saying, well, let government pick the winners and losers here. That's how we got the Solyndra problem. That's how we got a lot of these firms that got billions and billions of dollars of tax money, and they ended up not being viable. I say give the American people their tax money back and let them allocate where technology is viable and let them pick the technology of the future, and not Joe Biden and the 435 members of Congress.
And climate change is a real problem?
I do believe that we are seeing the climate change. I think that carbon being put in the atmosphere is a real concern. But I also think that we as humans will develop the technology and the ingenuity to get us out of this problem. I have no fear of that.
I see Rolling Stone calls you the most influential libertarian in America. But wait a second. What about Ron Paul? What about me? I think I'm the most influential.
Well, you're very influential, and nothing against you. And I think Rolling Stone gave that moniker to me in 2022 after I forced the runoff in the U.S. Senate race, which was extremely important. It was the most expensive Senate race in history. And I forced...
In Georgia, you forced the runoff.
Yes, against Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker.
In Georgia, it's headed for a December 6th runoff election.
And so in doing so, I gave huge amounts of notice and prominence to the Libertarian Party and really upset the most important Senate race in the country. And that got a lot of eyeballs on libertarians.
Both candidates are fighting for the 80,000 Georgians who voted for Libertarian Chase Oliver.
You'll probably be on the ballot in all the states, and people, Democrats and Republicans, complain. He's going to be a spoiler. He's going to elect the other guy.
The third party could end up playing spoiler for Democrats and for President Joe Biden.
Libertarians have been spoilers before and could be again.
I've always said you can't spoil something that's already rotten. And if you look at the approval ratings of Congress and the president, they're always below 50%, or even in Congress below 20%. They're already spoiled rotten. People are sick and tired of the two-party system. And so if you call us a spoiler, the only thing that's being spoiled is the two-party elitism, the people who want to control our government. I say, if you don't want spoiling, give us ranked choice voting. Give us better ways to vote that don't have the quote-unquote spoiler effect. But I can't give that to you. I'm just Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate. It's the people who are in power in the government and the state houses across America that could give us ranked choice voting and have truly more representative ways of picking our leaders. But they are just fine not having that and spoiling every election because it maintains their power. They're the spoilers.
If you get 3% of the vote, that would be a lot for non-major party candidates. Trump said,
What is the purpose of the Libertarian Party getting 3%? What is the reason to take a chance of having this horrible president destroy our country?
Is he talking about himself? Because he's a horrible president who was destroying this country.
He's talking about Joe Biden.
I'm sure he is. But in all seriousness, you know, we get our 1% to 3%. We're pushing the Overton window and we're putting the ideas of liberty out there. For 50 years or more than 50 years, the Libertarian Party has been around. And if you look at things like the drug war and cannabis, we were leading the way 50 plus years ago. If you look at gay rights and same-sex marriage and don't ask, don't tell and all these things, we were leading the way over 50 years ago. We've been ahead of the mainstream. We carved the path that the mainstream, the river of mainstream political opinion later comes down. And I'm very proud of libertarians for doing that.
You should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
The idea that we can win together. No libertarian is going to be winning under Donald Trump. I mean, he makes promises, and sure, he's made promises to many people in the past. Oh, I'm going to be libertarian on this, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. I trust him about as far as I can throw him, because the truth is he's been a liar his entire life throughout his time in business, throughout his time in politics. And so, sure, he can say a lot of things that libertarians might want to hear, but what we have is the advantage of seeing 4 years of him governing in action. And it was extremely unlibertarian. He locked down this country. He blew up the debts and deficits. He increased the amount of drone bombs in the war machine. He is not a libertarian. He never has been, and he never will be.
If you hurt Biden or Trump, who would be worse as president, Biden or Trump?
You know, I was asked at the Libertarian Convention with a gun to my head.
If you had to pick a Democrat or a Republican, a Joe Biden or Donald Trump, gun to your head, who would you vote for?
The gun would go off. They are both terrible in their own ways. They're two sides of an authoritarian bird. And frankly, I think we're going to be more polarized, more hyperpartisan, and less able to come together as one American nation if either of those men win the White House, which is why I'm running for the White House, because I want to bring unity to our country.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. You were originally a Democrat. What changed?
Well, what changed was the Democratic Party, because I started out in the Democratic Party as an anti-war protester, opposing the Bush wars. And we had a candidate for president who ran on a lot of promises to end those wars.
I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war.
Close Gitmo and change the way we do business with foreign policy. And he actually got elected. That was Barack Obama. And then he failed on every one of those promises. And it drove me out of the Democratic Party because I realized it wasn't really an anti-war party. It was an anti-Bush party masquerading as an anti-war party.
George W. Bush authorized 48 recorded drone strikes over his 8 years in office. Obama launched 52 in his first year alone.
The war machine was in both major parties, and I'm glad I found the Libertarians because they're the real anti-war party.
The first job of government is to keep us safe. Even we libertarians say that's a role for government. So what would you do? China is a threat. Russia is a threat?
Yeah, well, first, we don't need to be militarizing our response. I think when we push people with militarism, that increases tensions. We need to signify that the United States military is to protect the United States from invasion. It's not to be the world's policeman.
If our government doesn't do it, other governments like China are going to step in. Nations will become dependent on them.
What we need to be doing as we disengage militarily is we need to be warning nations of the world to not allow others to kind of take over and dominate them. We need to have equal trading partners in the world. I'm tired of seeing us flex our muscle on these other nations, and I don't want to see China doing that either. But that involves free and voluntary trade and opposing these kinds of trade wars that we see. When we have been trying to be the world's police, that increases tensions with nations like China, with nations like Russia. I think the biggest mistake that we made post-Cold War was being, adversarial to Russia. We should have, as Europe and the West, should have been much more wanting to work with Russia post the Cold War, because we would probably not have a Vladimir Putin in office if we'd increased market liberalism in Russia when we had the chance.
I thought we were, after the Berlin Wall fell, working with these former Soviet countries, and it's worked out well for many of them, but Russia becoming a threat would have happened anyway. It's Putin.
What we have to look at with Russia is that we are both the two preeminent nuclear superpowers in the world. I don't think either of us want to really go to war with each other. And so we're going to have to look to solutions to working diplomatically outside of those channels that don't involve us trying to increase military tensions. I believe in the best way to export our values is not with bombs and bullets and drones, but to do that with market cooperation and trade.
So Russia invades Ukraine and we do nothing?
Militarily, we've already done an awful lot. And I think Europe needs to start taking the lead there. But what we can do is have a diplomatic response to that. I support the bringing refugees in from Ukraine who are currently in danger. Let's bring innocent people out of the war zone. Let's keep them safe until the war is over. Let them resettle if they'd like to once the war is done. And of course, I oppose military conscription. So if I were president, I would offer amnesty to any member of the Russian military who's currently being conscripted to fight in a war they don't want to fight in. Because I believe conscription is slavery, and it's slavery with bombs and bullets.
Conscription is the draft.
Yes, I oppose it 100%, both here at home and abroad. I think it's wrong for any government to force people to fight in a war they don't want to fight in.
And the drones, you say. But in terms of warfare, using drones is less horrible than using people.
I think we need to use less of both of those things. And I think the real reality of drones is that we don't see the true damage that happens there. We don't see the collateral damage. We don't see the number of individuals who are innocent who die in these drone attacks. When all of a sudden, you're just living your life and then a missile comes and kills you or a member of your member of your family or someone you're close with, that might make you angry at the United States. I think we need to take our foot off the gas with regards to drones and access a different policy that's not rooted in militarism. I'm tired of seeing so many innocent people, many of them women and children, killed all around the world because of drones.
Close all overseas bases.
That's my North Star, and I would like to start that process immediately because, again, we have to stop being the world's policeman. The United States should protect itself from invasion. We should protect our citizens. But that doesn't require us to have to protect every single citizen around the world. And I think if you look at our militaristic empire that we've created over, the last 50 or 60 years, it's created further destabilization, less trust in the United States, and ultimately can make it more dangerous at home and abroad.
If Russia, say, attacked Canada, we should do nothing?
I think Canada would ask for our help, and I think there's a strategic reason we would want to help them. The continent of North America is something that we would want to make sure that no nation is invading. And we also have Alaska right there as well. So any movement through Canada from Russia is probably going to go through Alaska, and we're not going to be very happy about that, no.
What if I, as a private citizen, want to sell arms to Ukraine?
You should have that right. Absolutely. I believe in the right of free commerce, and if a military firm wants to sell hardware to somebody who will then be providing it to Ukraine, good on them. I just don't want the United States government to be facilitating that program.
The current fight between Israel and Hamas, what would you do?
You always want to say October 7th was horrible, and what happened was awful. And if that had happened in the United States, I have no doubt that the people of the United States would be expecting our nation and our government to respond to that kind of violence. So Israel has a right to respond. The nature of their response has been very, very bad because they've been doing airstrikes, killing tens of thousands of innocent people, when really this should have been a much more surgical attack against Hamas. I recognize you can't stop all civilian casualties in a war, but the way Israel has gone about this has been awful. It has killed so many innocent people. It is pushing the people of Gaza further and further in towards Rafah. It is making this into a worse and worse situation. And now rebuilding Gaza is going to take much more than it would have been if Israel had surgically striked against Hamas, had been much more careful about how they did that. Instead of using a scalpel, they used a sledgehammer. And that's wrong. We need to speak out against the war machine because we're backing it with our tax dollars.
If China invades Taiwan, America should do nothing.
America has already sold tons and tons of weapon systems to Taiwan. They're going to have to take care of themselves. No, we do not need to be starting a hot war with China to defend Taiwan. I spoke to an 83-year-old voter on the road, and the one question he asked of me is, he said, they took my generation, they drafted them to go fight communism in Vietnam. Will you draft young men and women to go fight a war with China over Taiwan? And I said, I will never do that. And that earned me that man's vote. And I think it will earn me the vote of a lot of people who remember the draft in Vietnam.
And foreign aid.
Foreign aid, yes, we want to help spur economic development. We want to help people in other countries. But that's not best facilitated through government programs and government foreign aid. That's where you're taking money from the average taxpayer in the richest country in the world to give it to the richest people in the poorest nations on earth to parse out to their friends in favors and bribes. That furthers corruption. I would say it's better for us as individuals to directly invest in the marketplaces around the world and developing markets. Things like micro-lending and direct market investment are far better than government-sponsored programs of aid that really, we can keep giving more and more aid. Are we seeing that true economic development happening?
Switching to America, crime. What would you do?
We need to focus our law enforcement on crimes that actually have victims. Force, fraud, coercion, theft, violence. But what we need to do is stop putting our eye on the ball on things like victimless crimes like the drug war, consensual sex work, these kinds of things that don't really have a victim.
Well, there are victims of drugs.
Yeah, those victims of addiction, that is something we can address as a medical issue, not as a criminal justice issue. If you're an addict and you're thrown into jail, you're thrown into a trauma factory. You're going to be re-traumatized over and over again. And then when you're released from jail, the first thing you're going to do to alleviate that trauma is go right back to the addiction. It's not the best way to treat those who are suffering. We need to have better access to mutual and direct aid programs that can get people into a rehab bed instead of a prison bed.
Your campaign ad says,
I've gotten tear gas in the streets while I protest for justice reform. That was during the summer of 2020, during the George Floyd movement, the Breonna Taylor movement for police accountability and justice reform.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
I was on the streets in Atlanta when the National Guard was called in, and I've felt the tear gas and the pepper spray that's come from that as we were trying to peacefully protest. There was bad actors, trust me, on the streets there. But by and large, most of the people were there to peacefully protest, and they were further inflamed and further angered by our government's response and the violence that was caused by that. And so I know exactly what it feels like to have my own government tear gassing me while I fight for police accountability and peaceful nonviolent resistance.
You want fewer people jailed, but when we started jailing more people in America, crime did go down.
That correlation is not quite, telling the entire story there, because sure, more people have been in prison, but also the amount of crimes that we put on the book, the types of penalties we put on have been greater, and that hasn't created a greater effect in our neighborhoods. It hasn't really, while more people have been imprisoned, I don't think it's going to solve the issue just to remove people from society. And we're doing that more and more. And of course, many of the reasons why people are in prison is because of things like mandatory minimums. They're being forced into plea deals to avoid lengthier trial or lengthier sentences. It's the government really having its finger on the scale when there needs to be much more equal justice in this country.
But if you're a victim of a crime, you want the criminal locked up.
Absolutely. And this is why we should shift our focus to crimes that have actual victims. As I said, force, fraud, coercion, theft, and violence. But things like basic drug use shouldn't be getting you thrown in jail. It shouldn't be what the police are focused on.
They rarely convict someone or jail someone just for using. Almost all are at least selling.
Well, that is the creation of a black market that creates violence in our own neighborhoods. The reason why we need to end the drug war and decriminalize all drugs is because much of the violence we're seeing both on the police side as well as crime in the streets is being caused by this black market being created. It's the same thing that happened when we had prohibition of alcohol. People still wanted to use the alcohol, and guess what? When government made it illegal, a criminal element popped up, and the violence that came with it came in the hands of a Tommy gun.
Al Capone and the organized crime was created by alcohol prohibition.
Much of what we're seeing is created by drug prohibition, particularly in our urban areas across the country where we're seeing high rates of gang violence. Much of that is due to the profit motive that cartels have to sell drugs in our streets illegally. And that's what we're seeing in our streets right now. The violence we're seeing from the drugs is not just caused by drug use, it's caused by drugs being illegal and the black market that creates, because there's now a profit motive for people to do violence in your neighborhood.
America does lock up more people than any other country, a higher percentage. It is odd, but conservatives would say that keeps us safe.
If you want to really be called the land of the free, imprisoning, having the highest prison population on earth is not a real great way to exemplify that. I believe in more trust in people. I think many of the people who are in jail shouldn't be in jail. Many of those people should be in, programs to help them succeed in their life. They've had addiction or other problems that they need to be addressed, but they shouldn't be doing that in a jail. They shouldn't be doing that in a prison system that throws too many lives away, that creates too much violence, and again, creates trauma for many people. And so it creates a cycle. And if we're going to break that cycle, we have to be honest about it.
Is there ever a point for tougher punishment for, let's say, repeat offenders?
Well, yeah, certainly with crimes of force and violence. If someone keeps doing that, there needs to be a mechanism that says, you've repeated these offenses, there should be stiffer penalties for multiple offenses like that. Absolutely. I'm not opposed to those things. But of course, localities and states are going to determine those exact things. What I'm opposed to is mandatory minimums that say the first time you do a crime, you must suffer the harshest punishment possible. Because what that does is that ties the hands of judges to treat these things on a case-by-case basis. And it forces far too many people to take a plea agreement for something they maybe haven't even done. And so, yes, I would like to see stiff penalties for crimes that involve violence, and particularly repeat offenses need to be addressed as such. But for the average person, they don't have their hands tied with mandatory minimums being forced to take a plea.
So you sound libertarian to me, but among some libertarians, you're controversial. Montana's and Colorado's Libertarian parties rejected you as their candidate.
I can't speak for hurt feelings from a convention where people maybe had a different candidate they wanted. I want to unify this party. I'll be honest, if another candidate had won our party's nomination, I'd be right up there endorsing them, ready to work for them in the state of Georgia, because I believe in the Libertarian Party, I believe in our message. If folks are hurt over a few positions of mine, I urge them to really compare me to the other candidates. Really think about me compared to Biden and Trump and RFK.
Let's talk about those positions. The Colorado Party tweeted out, Oliver saying gender-affirming care is a decision between parents and child.
Yeah, I believe that's perfectly in line with our healthcare freedom policy plank and our parental rights plank of our party. That fits right. Why do we want government bureaucrats to be determining those things? Let the parents who are directly affected, who are going through this with their children, let them determine those things, just like every other healthcare decision.
But another criticism that makes more sense to me, while Chase Oliver was having a masked and distanced Thanksgiving dinner, libertarians risked fines and jail to have a normal, human, illegal Thanksgiving.
I am never going to determine what other people's behavior is and say that that needs to be the way it is. I did what I did during the beginning of the pandemic.
You tweeted, it's not impossible to be responsible. Limit the size of groups. Wear a mask when not eating.
Yeah, and that was responding to Lori Lightfoot, the governor or the mayor of Chicago, who said we can't have Thanksgiving dinners because it's too dangerous and we'll all get COVID from it. And I said, there are ways to actually do that and mitigate the chances of you spreading a disease. You just have to be smart about it. And I actually think that's quite libertarian for me to say to the mayor of Chicago, hell no, I'm going to have Thanksgiving. I don't care what the government says. I'm going to do what I'm going to do and make my own determination and my own decisions.
But now you're criticized because you wore masks and then took them off to eat and then put them back on. But on your side, it was 2020 and we were all terrified at the time, and lots of us wore masks in stupid situations.
I had immunocompromised friends and family. And so those are the people that I was thinking of first and foremost. I wasn't thinking of performative, I won't wear a mask because whatever. I was doing what I thought might have been best at the time. And then, of course, in the city of Atlanta, to go shopping or anything, you had to wear a mask. And I wanted to continue living my life as much as possible, and the ability to go to the grocery store if I had to put a mask on to do that was far less of an inconvenience than not being able to live my life at all. I recognize that much of the country was far more locked down than Georgia was. And if you look at the economic growth that Georgia had in response to a lot of the big lockdown states, I think it's a good thing that we did reopen as quickly as we did. But I'm never going to shame anybody for their decisions that they made at the time. And frankly, I think it's unlibertarian to kind of shame people's personal decisions and demand that the government should have been making those, or the government, some sort of determinant of what's right and what's wrong. No, you should determine what's right and what's wrong.
You make some conservatives mad, too.
Far left person when it comes to libertarian social policies. He supported the employer vax mandates, which is the least libertarian policy in human history.
Ben Shapiro is not a libertarian. He's not one to really be able to tell us what is and isn't libertarian if you look at his policies and what he believes. But frankly, I support the right of property owners to determine the business that happens on their property or in their business. And if that includes vaccines or, saying you have to wear a mask to enter their business, you as a consumer then have a choice to, will I work at this business or will I take my talent elsewhere? And I would say a lot of businesses who required vaccines probably lost a lot of good talent to firms that didn't. And that's the way the marketplace is supposed to work. That's the way the marketplace is supposed to react, not government.
Yeah, he implies he wanted mandates, but you're just saying let a private owner require whatever he wants on his property.
Yeah, I don't support mandates from government at all. In fact, I support your right to make your own determination and your own decisions. We libertarians have said for a long time, good ideas don't require force. And we have to live that value. We have to live that principle and say, no, we don't need the government to mandate things, even things we might think are good or can save lives. We'll mandate that for ourselves. We'll mandate our own behavior. That's self-governance.
Another comment from Shapiro.
He is in support of the transing of the kids. He talks openly about sending kids to drag queen story hour. There are actual pictures of him with drag queens.
Oh no, photos of me with drag queens. Oh my. Now, the truth is I support the right of parents to make the healthcare decisions in consultation with their doctor and their children that are best for that child. I'm not in favor of transing or not transing. I'm in favor of parents making determinations that's the best for their family. And I'm not a healthcare expert, and neither has Ben Shapiro. As far as drag queen storytime, I went to a drag queen storytime event in Rome, Georgia, the Pride Parade that Marjorie Taylor Greene had her people protesting against, because I wanted to see what this was all about. I wanted to see what the fuss was all about because, I'm a gay man. I've seen adult drag. I have. And I'm like, that's not good for kids. But what is this story time? It was a person in a wig reading a story about butterflies and singing Baby Shark. It's the equivalent of Mrs. Doubtfire. It's not anything to be controversial or scared of. And I think maybe some of these conservatives who are terrified of Drag Queen Story Hour maybe should go attend one and recognize that, yeah, they're reading one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. It's not some sort of Marxist indoctrination center. These kids are just singing songs and being entertained.
The Libertarian Party has nominated Chase Oliver, a far-left communist candidate.
Cool. I'm not one. I absolutely oppose communism and central planning and with every fiber of my being. And so I don't know where people get this idea that I'm a communist, considering I hate the idea of centrally planned markets. I can't stand the inefficiencies and the violence that come. And of course, the millions of people who were killed through starvation and violence from the state when the Soviet Union was in power. Yeah, communist states are terrible, and I oppose communism 100%. I'm quite libertarian. I don't understand this affectation of me somehow supporting the left or Marxism or these kinds of things. I just support the right of people to make their own decisions for themselves. I mean, nothing can be more libertarian than that.
Thank you, Chase Oliver.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. New episodes drop the first and third Mondays of every month. You can subscribe everywhere you get podcasts.